Okay, good morning. Should be up and running. My name is Sergeant Olson, OLSEN. I'll be doing the briefing this morning, July 14th, 2023. First thing on the agenda, Chief Toom is here with us, and he is going to discuss an incident that occurred overnight.
Hi, Chief John Toom. Wanted to discuss incident that took place last night and get you up to date on that. Last night about 9:30, officers were dispatched to the area of Brookings and Waltz to a residence. Basically, the reporting party reported that they were in their house, they heard some banging in the garage, and went out to the garage and discovered an individual in their car that was rummaging through their car. So, the reporting party confronted the individual in the car, at which point that individual produced a handgun, pointed it at the homeowner, and basically held him at bay while he fled the garage and into the neighborhood. At that point, again, the reporting party was able to separate and call 911. The victim was able to provide a good suspect description as far as who was in his house, with several distinctive descriptors that were helpful for officers. Officers flooded the area at that time, but were unable to locate that individual. Fast forward to about 1 this morning, or this previous morning, officers were on a call in the area of Rice and Prairie when, as they were working through that call, unrelated, an individual walked past, or they saw an individual who matched those descriptors of that person that was involved in that incident earlier. They attempted to make contact with that individual. The individual ran through the neighborhood, and a foot pursuit ensued with officers attempting to locate the individual. In the course of that, one of our officers encountered him in a backyard, and in the course of that interaction, the individual was armed, and our officer fired their duty weapon, thus making it an officer-involved shooting. Again, sometimes you'll see where these hit the news pretty quick. Sometimes they don't, depending on what happens and what goes out on the scanner. But this one, again, happened roughly a little after 1 this morning. The suspect was struck, was transported to the hospital, non-life-threatening injuries, has already been released and turned over to the care of the Minnehaha County Jail. As with standard case with all these incidents, DCI was immediately called and responded to conduct their investigation on this event. Single officer involved that discharged their weapon will be on administrative leave as per standard, and we've seen in previous practices. And again, you can ask questions as we get through this, but you will understand that I'm limited on what I can talk about or answer. It is now in the hands of DCI for investigation. I can tell you, though, that a firearm was recovered on scene. There's still some details to work out, and the investigation is ongoing, so we're still working through some of the other issues that took place previously that night. But at this point, the individual is lodged at the Minnehaha County Jail for possession of a firearm by a felon and on a parole hold. I can give you the name when we get to the end, probably, but you'll probably want to, if you want to try to address some questions, you certainly can. Again, thanks for DCI's quick response. Great partners of ours. We work well together. We obviously have had well-covered practice as far as working together, working through these types of incidents, but we are looking forward to their investigation concluding and have great confidence in their work. Again, thanks to the Minnehaha County Sheriff's Office, who helped us secure the scene and helped us with assistance last night. And I believe the Highway Patrol was also in the area, so thanks to them for helping us work through this, and thankful that no officers were injured, and we'll work through this as kind of per standard protocol as we have in the past. I can attempt to ask any questions, and I can give you some details on the individual that's locked up.
Did this suspect point a weapon at law enforcement or draw a weapon?
So a weapon was located on scene. Again, I won't get into those details. As with typical, and we kind of hit pause on what we do as an agency and turn it all over to DCI. So there's body cam footage, video footage, interviews that need to be done. So it's inappropriate for us to comment on anything beyond the kind of time, place, and what got us to that point. And then the DCI will have the rest of the details in their summary, or you can reach out to them.
And then with regard to that weapon found at the scene, that weapon had been in possession of the suspect.
Yeah, and so we'll have to work through, again, if there's any correlation to that previous event or what the correlation are. Like I said, there were some key descriptive factors that led officers to believe that individual was involved in that incident in the garage earlier.
On the initial call, was over in Brookings, the Brookings area. Do we think these were related?
Sorry, Brookings and Waltz?
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, at this point, we believe they are, but we have to dot the i's and cross the t's on some further parts of that
Did the
investigation to make sure.
homeowner, was it the homeowner's weapon that the suspect had at that scene?
So we don't know at this point, as we typically don't manipulate or go into great detail, as we let DCI run some of those facts down. But they'll collaborate with us and cooperate with us when we kind of put our heads together on those parts of the case. We're still doing work in regards to that original event. Our detectives are still working that as we speak to kind of continue that investigation, though.
And at the Brookings and Waltz scene, the suspect who was found in the garage there, did he live in the area or unknown?
It's unknown. We believe he lives somewhere in the area. Again, he is on parole, but was non-compliant in his parole status. So there's some things to fill in on that point too, as far as if he was where he was supposed to be or not, so.
Is it, it's been a while since the last time the department's had something like this, an officer-involved shooting, but every time this happens, is it something where it's a learning experience possibly
Sure.
for the whole department in a sense?
Yeah, just speaking in general, I think December, if I remember, serves me correct, December 20th was our last one. And that will be 10 that we've had since I've been chief. I think there's some pretty good rundown. Argus has a pretty good rundown usually of those events in the past. And each one's uniquely different. And again, what gives me concern is these are obviously dangerous incidents, risk to officers, risk to the public, and honestly, risks at the end of the day, I reiterate, we do not want to have to be engaging people with our firearms. That's not something we seek or desire to do, but it's a result that happens sometimes. And so again, we learn something from each one and how it goes, and look at our training and look at different things, because as law enforcement professionals, we always have to be assessing just each event, what others can learn from it. In the tactical world, which I'm familiar with, we debrief everything, right? And we do that as a department too, just to make sure others can learn and look at these events. Because again, my biggest concern is, again, I worry about our officers. We're getting assaulted at a higher rate than ever, vehicles rammed, encountering weapons. We want to make sure our officers are as prepared as possible by, again, learning from events or incidents that have taken place.
Is the parole absconder any relation to the initial victim?
No, not that we believe. Yep. And just to clarify, I don't believe they're had reached absconder status yet. There's some paperwork that has to get filed, but a bulletin was put out yesterday that this person was in non-compliance with parole, right? So a little bit of a nuance on how we, because that's kind of had to work that through, were they absconder or not. Well, they had put out basically a be on the lookout for us yesterday that this person was in non-compliance with parole.
What's the likelihood that the individual could face additional charges down the line?
I would say very likely. And that's why, again, I think we know what we have at the moment, which is the felon in possession of a firearm charge and that parole hold. There's still charges to put together that we now have the luxury of, as far as that original incident time of completing a thorough investigation. And with DCI's case, they're going to have the ability to kind of weigh through their interviews and what they have and determine the appropriate charges if they need to add them. And we've been in communication. What's nice with these events is I'll immediately contact State's Attorney Daniel Hagar, and we'll talk about it. We'll always be working together from the start, so they're kept abreast of what's going on, and DCI does the same, and we work together as a team to kind of make sure we make sure everything's put together in an appropriate way.
Ultimately, who's going to be the one that decides what charges are filed? Will it be the state's attorney?
So when it comes to the interaction involved with the officer, that's ultimately we're leaving that with DCI, and they'll handle that. And they'll consult with either state's attorney or attorney general. But we know what we have from the immediate incident and what was located on scene with that individual. Our officers can speak to that and handle that part of the investigation and the previous investigation. But as far as the actual officer-involved shooting, we'll leave those details and facts to DCI.
Just to clarify, the administrative leave, is that paid or unpaid?
It's paid, yep. And it's basically time to determine and get some stuff done. And also, again, these are significant events for our officers to make sure that they have what they need in the way of support, but also time to just make sure they're ready to come back to work. Anything else, or I can give you the name, or go ahead, Dan.
Yeah, I think two questions. This is how many officer-involved shootings with the Sioux Falls Police Department this year, do you know?
This is the first of this year.
First of this year.
And if we're gonna go back 10, I think the 10th since I've been chief. And there's a chronological order of some other ones that kind of go back through history too. So,
You said a moment ago that officers are assaulted at a higher rate than ever.
yeah.
This is a question that could elicit a lot of discussion, but why do you think that is, Chief?
Oh, we could get really philosophical on this, right? But it's there seems to be, and over the past several years, kind of a trend of authority and law and order and what's there, and I think people are just willing to kind of use some of their thoughts and ideas about authority's role and the ability, and that's there. We could probably sit down and talk a lot more in detail about that from a variety of different levels, but the reality is, and I think if you guys have covered well, our vehicles are getting rammed at a higher rate, or sometimes it's not an outright ramming, just people not stopping and pushing their way through their cars, and that's a dangerous event too. I think the propensity and the availability of firearms is higher. People just have them more, are willing to use them. I've referenced in previous interviews when I was a young cop, like 2005, we'd come across a firearm, it was a significant event. It's now a regular event. And so there's just a shift in kind of how things are happening, and we'll keep looking at the trends, but again, what I've stressed before and concerns me is the amount of repeat offenders that we're dealing with, people who are in the system and repeatedly committing crimes or escalating crimes through their time in the system, and I think that's something that we've addressed both legislatively, but we're having open, honest conversations with the public, with our elected officials to say, okay, who are we needing to take care of on the other side, but also how are we getting resources and things in place to keep high-risk individuals from becoming that statistic, right? To early intervention, to juvenile intervention. Again, ask a question that's not going to take about an hour to talk about it. So we could dig deep into it, but that's kind of the point of what I look at is what points are we doing and how are we going to approach these topics as a society.
And this individual, once again, familiar to law enforcement?
Yeah, very familiar to law enforcement, so.
One last question.
Yeah.
Going back through your tenure as chief, how many of those officer-involved shootings have involved the same officer? I ask because of that frequency. And
Sure.
escalation.
So, yeah, there's, and again, as I was sitting and talking with the officers, sometimes I'm, like for each of these that we've had, I can't recall of one that's been in multiple situations off the top of my head, right? It's a uniquely experience for a law enforcement officer, despite what movies and TV show us. The reality is the vast majority of cops never have to fire their weapons in their duty, right? And so and again, I comment but for me, this is becoming all too routine. And again, I don't want to be too comfortable with having to give these press conferences or have these talks because we don't desire this to happen. We desire compliance. We want people not to get in positions where they're armed with law enforcement. Nobody wins when that happens. Legitimately, nobody wins. And so, again, that's kind of, how we look through things and work through things, but that's what the message we want to give is, again, we would prefer that most of our officers never get involved in this situation.
Just one question, kind of.
Sure.
About staffing. With the surge of population in Sioux Falls, has the staffing kept up on the police department to match that?
Yeah, so we've experienced great growth under this administration. We're able to grow throughout each budget year. This year's budget's just coming up, and we'll see some more growth in officers. The difficult part for us is we're currently about 20 officers down, which is better than most agencies in the country, especially on a percentage level. We just have a depressed supply, right? I think teaching is seeing it too, nursing is seeing it too. A lot of these service professions are struggling with filling their ranks. And again, I think that's the message we want also to give out at any time is, we're hiring, we're looking for people who want to serve their community, but also we understand that, the profession's taken some lumps over the past several years, but there is absolute purpose, mission, and value in serving your community. And we're looking for people who want to serve their community and work there. But the prevailing story for the next several years in law enforcement will be the shortage of officers and the shortage of staff. We can have all the support in the world from the community. We can have all the support, financially, and we have it. But we need people to fill those jobs. And again, I about every time this topic comes up, I'll also point to teachers and nurses in other areas where we need people who are willing to do sometimes jobs that don't always have maybe the best pay or the best days off or the best benefits, but are critical to society and a well-functioning society. So there's my plug for several professions. But of course, we're looking to hire too. We have a hiring class coming up end of July, which will hire 16 to 17. Excited to tell you about that when it comes up, and again, really push hard for recruitment and making sure we get our ranks filled. All right, I'll give you the name if you want it. Yeah, last name Kilbourn. That's Kilbourn. First name Sean, Sean. Middle name Henry David, and a date of birth looks like 1/2/88. And as of currently, again, lodged for, and this will change throughout the day. You can even see if charges are changed or added. Possession of a firearm by a felon and a parole hold. He's on parole for escape, grand theft, controlled substance, simple assault on Leo, a stolen vehicle. And we believe the grand theft that he's on parole for was also firearm related. So, confirming that, but that's what the last report I had before I came in here to give this update. Again, further updates, I think Travis, our Sergeant Olson, will have some things to cover with you too, but again, thanks for coming, thanks for your time, and appreciate it.
Mr. Colo lives in Sioux Falls.
He is currently a Sioux Falls resident.
Well, I mean,
Yes.
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
prior to his lodging in the jail.
Prior to his lodging in the jail, he was listed as a Sioux Falls resident on parole and assigned to Sioux Falls. He has some history in other parts of the state too, as well. So, all right, thank you.
Okay, moving on to some other business that occurred over the last 24 hours. There was kind of an interesting call up on the north end of the city. It all started near Ditch Road, I think 84th Street North and Ditch Road, which there's a tree farm out there, and we have some city employees that do some kind of maintenance work out there of some kind. One of the employees apparently found 3 suspicious objects and brought them back to the city and then alerted law enforcement, and they were found to be, from what I am told, some kind of makeshift homemade, believed to be firearms, not necessarily like not firearms, fireworks, like some kind of makeshift homemade fireworks that were suspicious and potentially hazardous in nature. These were turned over to law enforcement. Representatives of our bomb squad took possession of them, rendered them safe, and they're looking into that. So far there's been no charges or anything like that, and certainly depends on what the intent was. It sounds like they were found shortly after July 4th, so it's believed that they were brought back into the city, brought back into the city after they were located, but they were found somewhere around July 4th. Just want to take the opportunity to remind the public that if you see something potentially hazardous or suspicious or any kind of object like that you're not sure what it is and it looks out of place, then by all means give us a call, because we'd rather look at it instead of have somebody manipulate it or something and have someone get hurt, which fortunately nobody did. Next item on the agenda, speaking of officers getting assaulted, we'll touch on this one. At around 8:17 p.m. yesterday evening, officers responded to a shoplifting that had occurred at a convenience store in the area of 18th and Marion. When officers arrived, they apparently discovered a matching subject nearby, and a foot pursuit occurred. The individual was at some point cornered and non-compliant with officers, and a fight ensued. Officers attempted to take the subject into custody, and during this, one of the officers was bit, and another officer also suffered some form of an injury that I can't quite say for sure what it is. Both officers were ultimately treated and released, and our suspect was taken into custody, fortunately. It was found that he'd tried to steal a fountain pop and a couple phone charging cords from the convenience store. But this individual was lodged for obstructing law enforcement, resisting arrest, simple assault on law enforcement, and assault by contact with bodily fluids, also known as sliming, which is a felony. arrested was last name White Eagle, Whiteeagle, first of Casey, Casey, who's a 30-year-old Sioux Falls resident. And he was lodged on the aforementioned charges.
Why not those two words?
Yes, that's my understanding.
So he allegedly assaulted two officers.
Two officers were involved in this scuffle, an attempt to get him into custody. So I know he tried to bite one of the officers, and he did successfully bite another officer on a forearm. So, and it sounds like it broke the skin, and it was not a good deal. Any other questions on that one? Okay. Lastly, that I'll kind of touch on too, the chief had mentioned that during the other incident on the north end of town, that officers were basically investigating an unrelated incident. We'll kind of talk about that one. This one's still under investigation. Don't really have all the details for exactly how this transpired, but it is unknown to be related to the officer-involved shooting that later occurred. But the investigation they were working on when they spotted this individual matching the description from the other burglary gun theft issue, or I guess possession of a firearm issue, was at an apartment where an individual was found bound and his car stolen near Rice and Prairie. So officers were out there at Rice and Prairie near 20 minutes after midnight early this morning. A nearby resident had called, hearing that they could hear somebody calling for help from an apartment. Officers ultimately found this individual that was bound and assaulted inside this apartment, and he reported that he was essentially brought there by a third party, that they're still looking into those details and how that happened and who this individual was, and ultimately his car was taken as well. So that was that call that they were working on. It's unknown if it was a friend or acquaintance of someone that was involved in this deal or set something up or something like that. They're still working on that. And obviously it was a busy night, so I'm sure detectives are getting after this one shortly as well. So that's all I've got this morning. Anybody got any other questions on the night's events?
Now on the night's events, curious from a question from another reporter, and understood if you don't have this in the moment, this week or in recent days, has there been a notable spike in reports of stolen cars?
Well, I did notice that there were a number of them on the list here today. Not to mention the one that just happened, which was actually maybe potentially more of a robbery if somebody assaults somebody and takes their car. But I'm counting 9 off the top of my head here. It looks like in the last 24 hours, at least since 8 a.m. yesterday morning, 9 different reports of stolen vehicles during that time frame. So yeah, it seems like it's been happening more and more frequently. Once again, just kind of like in the winter time when people start their cars and let their cars run to warm up, it seems like a lot of times keys are in vehicles and things like that. That's generally the reoccurring theme. Unlock cars with keys in them that get quickly taken. So it seems like the car thieves around here don't typically spend a whole lot of time trying to hotwire cars like they used to back in the day, or force entry into them to steal them. But that does also happen too, unfortunately. So yeah, it does seem like there's been a recent spike.
The victim who was found bound,
Mhm.
were they treated at a hospital or anything, any major injuries?
Of course, they were provided treatment. I'm not aware that it's a major injury that happened to them. I believe it to be likely non-life threatening. That's about the most I can say on that, to my knowledge. Anything else? Fair enough. That concludes for the day. Oh, all right. You guys have a good day.